For this afternoon and tonight, a significant winter storm, including heavy snow with blowing and drifting snow.
Hello and welcome to the SnowBrains Podcast, where it's my job to interview the most intelligent people in the snow sports industry and pass their fascinating knowledge on to you, our listeners. I'm your host, Miles Clark. I'm a professional free skier, a mountain guide, an Alaska heli ski guide, a UC Berkeley molecular cell biology graduate, the founder and CEO of SnowBrains, and I just drove 579 miles across the spectacular deserts of Nevada for the 49th time since 2017. In 2017, I extended my tentacles from solely being based in Lake Tahoe, California, to being based in Tahoe, Utah, and Jackson Hole, Wyoming. The Golden Triangle never disappoints. Thanks, North America. This episode of the SnowBrains Podcast is brought to you by Club Med. Are you ready for an unforgettable ski getaway that takes care of everything? And I mean everything. Head to one of Club Med's mountain resorts where you can experience the thrill of the slopes without worrying about a thing. With their all-inclusive packages, you'll get all your lift tickets, ski passes, ski and snowboard lessons for all ages and ski levels, delicious meals, exciting après-ski activities, and even childcare for the kids, all included in the price. So you can focus on what matters most, carving perfect turns and enjoying the breathtaking views. Visit www.clubmed.us or call 1-800-CLUB-MED or call your travel advisor to book your ski escape today. My guest today is Dr. Ethan Greene. Dr. Greene has been the director of the Colorado Avalanche Information Center since 2005. He's worked in snow and avalanches since 1990. He grew up in Boulder, Colorado, and worked as a ski patroller at Big Sky, Montana, and as a backcountry avalanche forecaster for the Utah Avalanche Center. Dr. Greene has an undergraduate degree in meteorology, a master's in atmospheric science, a PhD in geoscience. He's written 2 books on snow science and avalanches and has over 45 publications in the snow science world, and he is obviously an avid backcountry skier. Hello, Dr. Greene. Welcome to the show. Thank you very, very much for being here again. I think the 4th time. How are you today?
I'm good. Thanks for inviting me back, and please call me Ethan.
Ethan is great too. Well, Ethan, I again appreciate you being here. I know how busy you guys are right now in the busy month of October as the season approaches. When did you ski last?
Oh, that's a good question, because I was gone for part of the spring, so it must have been 3rd week of May.
So you're ready.
Yeah, I'm ready, but I really like the fall. So I enjoy this time of year, and there's a lot of stuff to do besides ski right now, and so I'm enjoying that. So I'm ready for ski season when it comes, but I'm also doing fine the way that it is right now.
I love fall as well. So Ethan, today I really want to dig into what happened avalanche-wise in Colorado last season and more. So to jump right into it, let's talk about Avalanche season insights from last year. How would you describe the 2023-2024 Avalanche season in Colorado?
Well, that's a tricky question for me, and I think maybe most of the folks on our team, because in some ways, every year is different, and there's definitely details that we'll focus on for any particular year. But then, a lot of the years have kind of similar patterns and similar framework. So I think last year, there's certainly some things about it that were unusual or atypical, maybe is a better way to put it. And then others that were fairly standard. I know that's a bit of a cop-out answer, but it is sort of how it feels.
It's not at all, because I'm very curious, what stood out to you as unusual last year and what might have felt kind of regular?
Well, the progression of the snowfall, I think, was fairly regular or not that unusual, because regular may be overselling it a little bit. We started to get some snow in October. Some places that October snow certainly created a problem for us that lingered for a while. We had kind of a building snowpack, through Christmas, and pretty thick snowpack in the central part of the winter, especially in certain parts of central and southern mountains. And I guess the Steamboat Mountains as well. So parts of the northern, parts of the central, and parts of the southern mountains. And then, we went into a pretty interesting spring. We had some pretty good spring conditions, at times. And I like to do a little crust skiing around Leadville, as things start to develop that firm crust. And we actually had a couple different cycles where there was decent crust skiing, in the spring. So yeah, I don't know if that's unusual or normal.
Maybe. And if you don't know, then nobody does. I love that. Just for our listeners, how long have you been in Colorado now, and how long have you worked at the Avalanche Center?
Well, I grew up in Colorado, so I lived in other places kind of in my 20s, but otherwise, yeah, I'm in my 50s and I've been here my whole life. I've been working for the CAIC since 2005.
Wow. So yeah, so you're a good person to talk to on all this. Do you know how many, or can you share the number of human triggered avalanches that occurred in Colorado last season in 2023, 24?
Well, I can't tell you how many occurred, but I can tell you how many were reported to us.
That's a better way of saying
it. And that is 1,101.
And that sounds like a lot. Is that off of average? Is that more or less?
I don't actually know what the trend is over time for that. I think like the total number of avalanches that we recorded was over 6,000.
Wow.
And that is a little more than normal, or maybe more than, typically we're in that 5,000 range somewhere. So that 6,000 number is a little higher. So I would suspect the human triggers are a little bit higher as well, but I don't know that for sure. The thing to remember with these numbers, like we just talked about, is it's what's reported to us.
Right.
And we spend a lot of time doing field work, documenting avalanches, sharing information with other avalanche operations, getting stuff from the public. But it's still just a small fraction of what actually happens out there. And so, you might consider that 6,000 number to be somewhere around 10%. And we don't even actually know that for sure.
Right.
It's a fairly small fraction of what's happening. I would hope that we have a higher percentage of the total for human triggered, but we actually don't really know that either, because we're fairly strict from a record keeping perspective about what we consider a human triggered or an avalanche or an involvement, just so that we don't, have to spend too much time discussing it amongst ourselves. We stuff written down, and if it falls into the right box, we document it that way. But, there's a lot of people out in the mountains in Colorado in the wintertime. And, on a busy weekend, there may be a bunch of people that trigger avalanches, and only, half of them or a third of them or 10% of them that report them to us.
Absolutely. So, but still, it seems like having over 1,000 reported avalanches in one winter seems like a significant number to me. And you only had 2 fatalities last year, which I think is terrific. I am curious, what might be some of the unique challenges of forecasting in Colorado? Because, just the Denver metro area is 3 million people. So you've got quite a lot of people, as you're referring to, visiting these mountains, going into the backcountry. What unique challenges do you guys face as a avalanche center?
Oh, that's a good question, and probably a topic for a whole podcast
right?
in itself. So one of the things that, at least the way that we sort of look at it, is the forecasting problem and the population challenge, shall we say, are part of the things that we have to deal with. But we really sort of look at them separately, because we're trying to forecast the avalanche conditions across the state for backcountry recreation, supporting municipalities, transportation. And it doesn't really matter that much whether there's 6 people driving the highway or 600 when we're trying to figure that out. So as far as forecasting the avalanches, I think the biggest challenge is just really the size of Colorado. Like, it's a big place. There's a lot of mountains. And although we look at it as a continental snow climate because we're, high elevation, cold, it's windy, we're far from the ocean. So we think about this as a continental snow climate. There's really a fairly big differences in different parts of the state. As you go from, Steamboat to Summit and Eagle County to Crest to Butte, and then down into the San Juans and Wolf Creek Pass, all of those places have fairly significant differences, on average. And then, of course, within the winter. People will always ask, is this going to be a heavy snowfall winter? And, the way that we kind of think about it is like, well, where are we talking about? Because we definitely have years where, the San Juans just get pounded and, it's dry, up in the northern mountains and the flat tops, maybe around Steamboat, and vice versa. That's one of the things about last winter that, you were asking about changes or unusual things. I think one of the things that was different about that winter was how big the gradient was from east to west. So
Mm.
if we look at like where we had heavy snowfall, like parts of the park range around Steamboat, 100%. Marble and Crested Butte had pretty heavy snowfall, deep snowpacks at times. And also, some parts of the San Juans. But, as you moved into like the Sangre de Cristos or parts of the Swatch or the Guido Range, areas around South Park, at times the snowpack was pretty shallow in those areas. And so, not that that's completely unusual, but that gradient at least felt a little bit stronger at times.
And that makes sense. Like you said, Colorado is huge, and that is the big challenge there. And you have so many mountains. I mean, I know Colorado has 54th peaks over 14,000 feet alone, right? And they're spread out over a vast area. I haven't spent any time in the San Juans, but just the San Juans alone is, enormous, it seems like.
Oh, you
So,
got to go. It's an
yeah.
amazing place.
I really do gotta go. I really do gotta go. I've seen it from the plane a few times, and I've got great pictures of it. And so it's
Well,
time
that's
to
a
get.
start, but
Yeah,
we're going to hold you to a higher standard. You
yeah. I
keep
don't.
the skis on the ground.
Yeah, I don't know if it's even a start, really. What makes Colorado uniquely avalanche prone? We've talked about this on other podcasts with you before, but I am curious just to reinstate this.
Well, there's a lot of details we can go into there, of course, but I think kind of your previous question gets at it.
Hmm.
It is a big place. There's lots of mountains. The snowfall and snow conditions can vary throughout the state, sometimes pretty dramatically. And there's a lot of people in the state, a lot of people visiting the state, and a lot of recreation that's like intertwined in the mountains. So it's
Hmm.
not like the roads just sort of go around the mountain range and you can pick your spot to like hike into them. Those roads are going through the mountains, and there's a town or maybe a couple of towns and a ski area, guiding service, and a set of groom trails for snowmobiles. And it's like that throughout a large part of the state, not all of it, because we do still have some places that are pretty hard to get to. But the whole like snowpack and people problem, which is, of course,
Mm.
what leads to the avalanche accidents that we all pay attention to, that's the overlaying of, snow and avalanche conditions and people. And we've got complicated snow and avalanche conditions and a lot of people.
And that has manifested itself in Colorado on average over a long period of time. I think since the 1950s, has twice as many avalanche fatalities as the next highest state. So it really has been an issue for Colorado because of a good amount of people, and you have a complex snowpack. And I am curious, how often does Colorado see large avalanches, size 4, size 5, but the biggest avalanches that we know about?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think our perspective on it has actually changed a little bit. I know mine has personally.
Mhm.
I used to question whether we had the terrain and the snowpack to produce size 5 avalanches in Colorado.
Mhm.
But then 2019 came along, and we had a really big avalanche cycle in March of that year. And it became very clear that size 5 avalanches were possible in Colorado. I still think they're not regular. We're certainly not getting them every year. We may be getting into that size 4 category, every year a few times, but getting into size 5 is a bit more challenging for us. But the other thing to remember around that is that this is a human construct that we're putting on to avalanches.
Mhm.
And when you look at that scale, there's some debate about how to put an event into one category, not because it's a bad scale, just because we're talking about something that's complicated. And so, different people are going to look at this and interpret things in different ways, especially when you're talking about events that are on the margin, sort of, large size 4s, small size 5s.
And I remember that. I think 2019, March 2019 was that year it kept closing the roads. Avalanches were coming down and putting trees and forests on the road, and it was just crazy. I remember a bunch of roads were closed extended amount of times, and some cars were between avalanches, I think even, so they're on a piece of road. You can't go forward, you can't go backwards. That was wild. And just for our listeners, the avalanche classifications go 1 through 5, with 5 being the largest. And I think 5 is maybe they say that could take out a village per se, for an example.
Yeah, that's right. There's actually two scales that we use in the US. One is sort of relative to the path. So, a really big avalanche for what that path can produce. And then there's destructive size, which is a little bit closer to what's used in Canada and in Europe. And you're right, that size 5 would destroy kind of a small alpine village.
Unbelievable. How many avalanche fatalities does Colorado average annually?
Well, we tend to look at a 10-year period, and 6 is sort of where we are for that
Mhm.
10-year period. Up until this last year, if you looked at a shorter period, more like 5 years, we were closer to 8. So we did have a few years where, the number was sort of higher than average for a few years in a row. And then, of course, we got this year last year where we only had 2, which drops the 10-year average down a little bit.
I love that we only had 2. Yeah, and so I guess decade over decade, or even 5 year over 5 year, is that trend going down or up, the amount of avalanche fatalities?
It's really staying fairly flat, both in Colorado and nationally. So do see peaks and valleys, in the annual number of avalanche deaths. But if we look over the long term, we're seeing something that is relatively flat and maybe a little bit sloping up for Colorado and a little bit sloping down for the U.S. As a whole.
Which again, I think is a really good thing, because even if we're staying flat, and especially if we're going down, but I think the amount, and you'd probably agree, the amount of users that we're seeing now in the backcountry has skyrocketed, especially since 2020, 2019.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a challenge for us and for all the avalanche programs in the United States and really worldwide, is trying to document or even understand what the use is. Because we do, like we talked about before, we record avalanches. We know it's not all of them, but we sort of record them the same way. So we can kind of look at those numbers. We do know how many people die in avalanches, especially in like the Western United States, Canada, Europe. There's a lot of people documenting these things. That's really the only number that we know for sure. The amount of people that are participating in backcountry sports or being exposed to avalanche hazard is not something that we know, because for the backcountry recreation, there's no tickets to buy, there's no turnstiles to go through, there's no systematic way that anybody is really counting these groups. There's also not even necessarily common embarking points. People can pull off of the side of the road anywhere and into the mountains. And so we have some numbers to help us sort of understand that, but really being able to normalize those numbers and say, like, hey, we've got the same number of fatalities, but increase in use, which is, I think, what everybody assumes and feels, that sort of educated guess, but we really don't know the answer to that.
If there was a parameter that you could use to try to figure out how many people are visiting the backcountry, what might you use?
Like in a perfect world or a fantasy or something that is
I think in the real
attainable?
world, for example, the only thing I've heard that might have some, and again, it's anecdotal, is the amount of backcountry gear sales have gone up. And so people think, if there's more of this stuff selling, there must be more people going to the backcountry. And I'm just
Yeah.
curious if you guys subscribe to that, or if you might have some other ideas.
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, those numbers are a little bit hard for us to track. Certainly, it's a good thing to look at. And when we have the ability to look at those numbers, we certainly do that. I don't know if it's reflective of the whole, but it doesn't really get us everything that we want. So some sort of people counter, trail counters, ways of counting people at specific spots that we can kind of infer what's happening over larger areas and kind of track that through time. I mean, that would be a nice thing to have. Ideally, being able to understand how often people are exposed to avalanche hazard. So I've been skiing for a long time. I've got kids. I'm getting older. I can certainly do a really nice ski tour and have a lot of fun without being exposed to a lot of avalanche hazard. And so a day like that for me is going to be really different than a day 20 or 30 years ago, where I was trying to spend as much time as possible during the day in avalanche terrain. And
Mhm.
so being able to understand that as the whole population, that's ideally what we'd want to know.
And I guess all we're really showing our listeners is the levels of complexity here. And I think you really opened a window there. So Ethan might go have a mellow day, get counted by a trail counter if there was one, and not even enter avalanche terrain. So you can just see, so, the numbers, no matter what you do, the numbers are going to have problems.
Yeah. I mean, that's just the nature of science, of course. Avalanche science and the whole public safety side that we all work in has a lot of complexities, which can be frustrating at times, but is also why it's really interesting. And yeah, I think for the general public, just thinking about what it means to be exposed to avalanche hazard. How much of your day are you really in harm's way when it comes to avalanches, and how much of the time is falling and bonking your head, or getting in a car accident, or some other hazard, bigger threat.
All right. Well, one more nebulous, unanswerable question. What trends have you folks observed in backcountry user behavior and preparedness over the past few years?
Well, nothing concrete, but I think just in general, the community as a whole has done a nice job of promoting avalanche safety as part of the recreation culture that we all have. That's another part about Colorado. It's not unique to Colorado, but I think it plays a role in what we see in Colorado is just the culture of getting outside into the mountains, doing recreation. It's a big part of why people live here. It's a big part of why people move here. And there's a lot of encouragement to do different activities outside. The backcountry skiing and backcountry snowmobiling communities, I think, have done a really good job of promoting avalanche safety, education, checking the forecast, carrying equipment as part of that culture. You want to become a really good rider, but you also, want to take an avalanche class so you can interpret the forecast. You want to make sure you have proper equipment. You need to know how to use it. And I think the way that we've seen that, and this sort of goes into avalanche deaths from last year, being only 2 in Colorado. Part of the reason that we only saw 2 deaths is because we saw involvements from a few parties that were very well prepared and were able to perform good rescues and get good outcomes in situations where that could have easily gone the other way. And so the difference for us between 2 avalanche deaths in a season and 6 or 8, in a lot of cases, comes down to some very small margins in individual groups in terms of what they're doing in the backcountry and what sort of rescues they're able to perform.
And I'd love to talk about those 2 avalanche fatalities if you're comfortable talking about them. Can you tell us about those 2 avalanche fatalities and maybe tell us a little bit more about the experts that were involved that were able to make the situation better?
Yeah, so there was one in sort of the end of January near the town of Ophir. So that's in the San Juan Mountains, kind of near Telluride. Mm-hmm. And it was a fairly experienced backcountry snowboarder who was traveling by themselves and was caught, buried, and killed. The second one was closer to the town of Crested Butte. It's in the Anthracite Range. And again, it was a very experienced skier, this time traveling in a group of very experienced backcountry travelers. And, he was caught in an avalanche and unfortunately, washed through some trees and buried and was killed.
How do you think that the experience status of these victims impacts the conversation around avalanche safety that day? And how may it help or hurt them that day?
Well, it's really hard. I mean, we do interview, the groups involved. Obviously, the first one was a solo person, so there's no group to talk to. We can get some idea of what the conversations are like in these different groups, but we want to be really careful about presuming too much about the decision making and what's happening in these different groups. I can tell you that people that have a lot of experience in avalanche terrain are often pursuing, much more dangerous goals. Not to say that that's dangerous activity per se, but, if what you want to do is climb or descend steep snow-covered slopes, you're, kind of like we talked about before, you're going to be exposed to avalanche hazard more, and your chances of getting caught in an avalanche are just going to go up over time. And so a lot of times when we see people that are really experienced, they have a lot of days in the backcountry, and their set of goals, well, like where they want to recreate, is just more dangerous topography, more dangerous terrain than some people. They just have a different view of risk taking and risk tolerance. And there's really nothing wrong with that. That is one of the wonderful things about backcountry recreation, is that it is up to all of us to decide where we want to go and when we want to go and what sort of risks we want to take. And there's just a really big difference in the population, what sort of risk is acceptable to different people in different groups.
That's so obvious. And I've never thought about that before, that more experienced backcountry users will take higher risks. And that kind of one-to-one for the most part. I see that as well in myself and my friends and the people that I see out in the backcountry. Less experienced people are going to stay mellow, stay in the trees, stay in lower angle stuff. And then as you slowly gain confidence, you gain exposure as well.
We've seen this in some of the accident statistics. I don't know if we've looked at it with some of the recent data so much, but I mean, you can sort of think about it as human behavior, right? Like, young people typically don't wake up one day and say like, I want to be an avalanche expert. There's a few out there, but for the most part, people are like, hey, like, I love the mountains. I love the snow. I want to, ride these big open slopes. I want to climb mountains. I want to, ski couloirs. I want to high mark big open bowls. And so their motivation to go do these things is about recreation and travel and mountain experience. And along the way, they recognize that, like, hey, like, I need better rope skills if I'm going to be doing this. I need to understand avalanches better. Whatever it is, I need to be able to do a better job understanding maps and planning routes. I need to understand route finding in steep terrain better. Those are things that come along the way, not because it was your primary goal, but it was because it's something that you recognized you needed to learn in order to do the other things that you want. And so our travel skills tend to progress faster than our avalanche skills. But when you're dealing with people that are spending lots and lots of time in avalanche terrain, like, they typically have really good travel skills. And when they look at the terrain, like, it's very easy for them to travel in that very steep terrain because they've done it so many times. And so how those different skill sets progress, happen in different ways. And I think you're right. Like, eventually you end up with a lot of days exposed to avalanche terrain, and you start to see things a little bit differently. Like a thing that may have looked really dangerous to you 20 years ago, all of a sudden looks normal.
And I personally think that the numbers are kind of against you, right? The more time you spend in avalanche terrain, the more likely you are to end up in an avalanche. So it's tough, as folks like me get older and you've just spent so much time out there, the numbers are kind of against you. Eventually something's going to happen. So that is a good miniature wake-up call, hopefully, for people listening. If you spend a lot of time out there, eventually it's a numbers game. Something's going to happen no matter how good you are. So good reason to keep your guard up.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's true for everything that we do, right? Like, the more time you spend driving, greater chance you are getting into a car accident, whether that's your fault or just something that happens. It's just a matter of exposure. So spending time in avalanche terrain is really the same way. Avalanches are tricky. There's people that are really good at understanding them and making decisions in avalanche terrain. But there's still a degree of uncertainty. And the more time that you're exposed to avalanche terrain, the greater chance you have of having some interaction with avalanches. And I think, like, most people that I know that have worked and played in avalanche terrain for a long time have some sort of close call where a judgment wasn't what saved them. It was a habit. It was something that they do all the time without thinking about it. I don't climb slopes like this. I stay to the side. Whatever it is. Depending on your travel mode, there's a lot of common habits that we have out there. I would say traveling one at a time across a slope, falls into that. At some point, you're going to have a bad outcome, or at some point you're going to get into an accident. And some habit that you do every day without thinking about it, hopefully will save your life. Hopefully it's judgment. Hopefully it's all analytical, but there's a good chance that it'll be a habit.
So the fundamentals and those habits of safe backcountry travel and avalanche terrain are critical. Get those burned in, because just that burned in behavior, once you gain that, can really be the difference.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a better way for us to be saying this. So hopefully you'll.
I think it's fundamentals, right? Like, if you have the fundamentals and you stick to the fundamentals, you're gonna inherently be more safe on average. And so learn those fundamentals and practice them every day.
Yeah, I think that's right. Understanding avalanches, having a good decision-making process, having good judgment, those are all really important things. Also, those basic fundamentals, those habits that you do every day without thinking about it. When your decision-making process stumbles and lets you down, those habits can save your life.
This episode of the SnowBrains Podcast is brought to you by Club Med. Calling all skiers and snowboarders, escape to the snowy peaks of Europe, Japan, China, or Canada with Club Med. There are more than 20 all-inclusive mountain resorts offer unparalleled convenience and endless adventures. Explore world-class ski resorts, indulge in authentic gourmet dining, and unwind with lively après-ski activities. Let Club Med take care of everything so you can simply relax and enjoy your ski getaway. Visit www.clubmed.us or call 1-800-CLUB-MED or call your travel advisor to discover your ski paradise. And for that person who passed away in the avalanche that was solo, can we talk about solo backcountry travel a little bit? What's your perspective on this?
My perspective is similar to what we were talking about just in terms of risk tolerance. It is definitely more dangerous to travel in the backcountry winter or summer by yourself. And it's certainly more dangerous to travel in avalanche terrain by yourself than in a group. That being said, the nice thing about backcountry recreation is we get to choose our own experiences and what's important and what's not. And I think it's certainly safe to say that it's recommended to travel in groups, in the backcountry and in avalanche terrain. But that doesn't mean that traveling solo is inherently wrong. It's just a different risk tolerance. Hopefully, if people are doing it, they're approaching those trips very differently. I do hope that they are still wearing a transceiver, telling people where they're going and when they're coming back, because those are going to help your family, help rescuers, maybe even help you. So there's different ways that people should be approaching these trips. But I will stop short personally of saying that traveling in avalanche terrain by yourself is something that you should never do. It's just something you should think very carefully about.
I personally love traveling in the backcountry solo, and I do it relatively often. And I think those key points are huge. Let somebody know, where you're going and what your time period is, what your schedule is that day. And I think one of the big keys, and I've talked to Mark Staples, the Utah Avalanche Center, about this, is to take it down a notch or a couple of notches. So what you might be comfortable approaching normally, a slope or an avalanche danger or avalanche terrain, take it down a couple notches, because if you are alone and something goes wrong, you're pretty much done for, because you're not going to have help. You might even survive an avalanche, but not survive the sequence after that, because you might be cold, you might not be able to travel, you might be injured. If you had a friend there, you'd more likely survive that. So I think it is key. Let people know where you're going, take it down a notch.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And Mark's looked at this quite a bit and has really good thoughts on it. And what you're talking about is really just your margin for error. If you're by yourself, yes, the margin for error is really slim. And it doesn't take a very big avalanche to make it so that if your head's under and it's a small avalanche, you really don't have much of a recourse. But like you're saying, you could get either just injured or buried in such a way that you can't extricate yourself without somebody there to help you. Again, you just don't have that many options.
Let's shift gears here. Thank you for that. You were just at the International Snow Science Workshop in Tromsø, Norway. And I'm so curious, what your experience was there, but let's be more precise. What might be the most interesting or potentially powerful thing that you learned at the ISSW?
Well, I'm sort of a microstructure geek. So, some of the snow physics presentations I thought were really pretty fascinating. I think from more of an avalanche forecasting perspective, it feels a little bit like our ability to model the snowpack and start to apply numerical prediction approaches to avalanches is really increasing. And so wow, I think that's really exciting. There's a bunch of groups in Europe and Canada, we're working on it a little bit as well, but just sort of seeing all the different work that people are doing that are pushing ahead, more of kind of a weather forecasting approach to avalanches, than what we've had in the past, where we've used all the tools for weather forecasting, but we're still really relying on people being out into the field and their experience and their judgment, kind of moving beyond that, where we can use some sort of numerical technique to predict avalanches. That's really evolving, and I think it's going to continue to evolve fast.
And what might the parameters be? What data are they entering into these kind of equations?
Well, there's a bunch of different approaches, which is, again, part of the cool part of it. There's snowpack models that are really simulating the data that we collect in snow profiles, dig a hole in the snow, look at the characteristics, start to get some of the parameters that are important for avalanches out of that. So, those are physics-based models, applying physics to to our problems. There's also, people are starting to look more at machine learning. The data sets around that are tricky, but there's been some groups that are doing a better job at massaging their data and being picky about how they're selecting data and having some success with that. So that's cool to see. And I think over the next, 10, 20 years, maybe more, we're just going to see, more and more of that. The physics-based models are going to get better. Our computational power, like we've seen in all other aspects of our lives, continues to go up, and we can harness that. I think these machine learning approaches are going to become, more and more important. I really hope that some of the remote sensing work that people are doing out there are going to become more important for us and more useful for us in operational avalanche forecasting and not just research. So it's kind of exciting. Like there's a lot of different things happening and it feels like things are accelerating. There's still some pretty big knowledge gaps and capability gaps that we have around avalanches. But every year, certainly over the last 20, we've seen that stuff fill in and it feels like that process is just happening.
I think that's fascinating. As our models get better and AI gets trained better to what you folks are doing and has some more understanding, which will take a long time, there's some real potential there for some absolute magic, especially in the forecasting side, that would keep us all safer and maybe give us, much more pinpoint accuracy on what's happening out there. But let's not get into it too much because right now, I'm always the spatial variability in snowpack is just terrifying. But it'd be cool if AI could understand more about it than we do. And when you're speaking about research and all these fun numbers, is the Colorado Avalanche Information Center involved in any research projects right now?
Yeah. Yeah, we're involved in quite a bit of research. I mean, we're an operational group, so forecasting operations, of course, is our biggest thrust, but we do collaborate on research projects with groups in Canada and the US and Europe. And then a lot of what we try to do is understand some of the research that these more academic, more basic research groups are developing and understanding how we can try to apply it to these sort of operational problems. But, we've done some stuff recently around looking at accident patterns in the US. We've done some work on trends of persistent avalanche problems, looking at forecast verification, ways of evaluating different parts of different programs. And then, we've been working on some more social science stuff with folks at Simon Fraser University. So that was some of the work that was presented at this last ISSW.
That is really complex because we think of you guys as data nerds. You're out there digging in the snow and centimeters and temperatures and densities and all this nerdy stuff. But the reality is to really have a 30,000 foot view of this science, if you will, there's social studies, right? There's psychology. All of that is, in the Venn diagram, there's a lot of overlap of psychology, social behaviors, and then the nerdy science. And so, you guys are expected to do so much. So I do like the idea that you might have somebody, really focused on the social side of things, somebody focused on the nerdy side of things, because it's just such a complex field. I feel like every time I try to pin down an avalanche professional on some kind of data or some kind of absolute, they always can just bring in the human factor. It's like, well, yeah, we have all these great things, but then add a human to that and good luck, good luck predicting where that goes.
Yeah, absolutely. Essentially what we're trying to do is limit the impact of avalanches on people. What you need for an avalanche accident is, the potential for an avalanche and a person that's in harm's way. And so understanding both of those things is really important if we're going to make, any progress. And it used to be way back in the day, there were people that were avalanche experts that really knew everything about the field that we are involved in. And I was actually talking to a couple of old friends at this last meeting about that. If you look back into the 60s and 70s, probably the 80s, maybe a little bit of the 90s, we had that. Like there were giants in our field that sort of knew everything that was going on and could talk at a very high level about every aspect of what we're doing. And it's really not like that anymore because there are so many fields that are intertwined in what we're doing, like you're talking about. And there's a lot of different people that are, looking at different aspects of this. And so like Pascal Hagley at Simon Fraser University, who's doing a lot of the social science work, who we're collaborating with, and there's a bunch of other avalanche centers around the world that are collaborating with him. But he's done this amazing job of really looking at the social science aspect of it and applying really good techniques to these problems that we've had people doing surveys and reading books in other fields and thinking about these things, and we've made some good progress through that. But to really see somebody who's applying more good social science methodologies to some of these problems is really fascinating, and it's a joy to be part of that.
Well, I'm excited to hear and see what they come up with when they do
what
have
people
something.
for your clientele, what they can do is join the snow pool.
Yes, tell us more.
So they can go to our website on the homepage, just scroll down, you'll see an invitation for snow pool. This is something that we're doing with Simon Fraser University, but it also is benefiting, all the different avalanche groups in North America. So you can take a survey there to kind of sign up for this pool. We'll collect a little information about you and how you travel in the backcountry and what you know about avalanches and what your goals are. Takes maybe 15, 30 minutes to kind of sign up. And then a couple times a year, we will send you questionnaires. And some of these are going to be fairly simple things like we have a kind of a basic question about program. We want to know if you like this icon better than that icon. But there's also surveys that come from Pascal's research group where they're really well designed and well thought out questionnaires to try to collect data that they can do statistics on. And so that was some of the work that they presented in Tromsø, last month. The last survey, I think we had like 1,500 responses.
Wow.
They're really looking at uncertainty information and how we can add that to the forecast to help people understand avalanche problems better. And they created a very rich data set. So there's a whole bunch of other questions they're going to be able to address there. So signing up for Snowpool will help us understand avalanche backcountry users better and create better products for them.
Avalanche.state.co.us and look for Snowpool. And I'm sure you could just Google Snowpool Colorado Avalanche Center and find that. So, Ethan, the CAIC recently worked with Colorado Mountain College coders to redesign your webpage for avalanche data. How has this improved your ability to communicate critical information to the public?
For us, it's a really neat project because we were able to work with students at Colorado Mountain College. They got hopefully a useful and interesting data set to work with and kind of showcase some of their skills. And, like you said, they built a really nice tool for us. And so that's really just looking at it's a map-based tool, looking at the spatial distribution of accidents. And then, you can kind of do some sorting. Right now, it's just fatal accidents, but we hope to be able to include sort of all involvements in there at some point. We've also been working over the summer, and I hope over the next couple of weeks, we'll roll out kind of a new display of avalanche accident information that will include everything from somebody getting caught in an avalanche to a partial burial and all the way up through fatal accidents. The way it's been on our website for a while is that if you look under accidents, you just see the reports that we write. So it has to be some sort of event where we took the time to write something about it. But now you'll be able to see personal testimonies where somebody just talked about doing a ski cut and taking a ride, and we didn't do an investigation, all the way up through more detailed reports. And so hopefully we'll give you a better idea of what's happening in the state in terms of human involvements, and also give you some tools to sort through and find the events that you're interested in.
This is fantastic. I'm on the webpage right now, and just for our listeners, it's got an avalanche row. So basically showing what aspects the avalanche happened on. So for example, there's in the last 5 years, there's no avalanches reported on, or avalanche fatalities reported on a south-facing slope. And then it shows the accidents by scale of relative size to path, and then the destructive size that we talked about earlier. And then, stuff that is really helpful also, not that that stuff isn't, but you can see February has the most avalanche fatalities. Then you go to May, and there's only one in the past 5 years. So, this is giving people a lot of really good information, including who is dying in avalanches. In Colorado, the last 5 years, it's mostly skiers, snowmobilers being number 2, snowboarders number 3, and then snowshoes and so on. And what kind of avalanches? So soft slab is the number 1 with 18 fatalities. Then hard slab is the number 2, and then it drops from there. So really good. I'm just looking at this first time, really good layout. And then obviously you have the map, and you can click on, you can see where all the incidents happened, their exact location, and then find more information. So terrific project. We're really happy to see this. And hopefully there is a snowball effect where this ends up in other avalanche centers as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. So glad that you're excited about it. And, we hope to continue to add functionality to it and make it easier for people to explore the information.
It's very elegant. Well done. One of my last questions is, I always push you guys on this, but did you learn anything at the ISSW this year in Norway about advancing technology for finding avalanche victims? I'm still so frustrated by how crude our avalanche beacons are. There's just got to be something better. And I know it might be too expensive, and maybe just the US military doesn't care enough to worry about this problem. LiDAR, there seems like something at some point would be better than what we have. Did you learn anything about that?
That is a good question. I did not learn anything more about finding avalanche victims. There is a group that has created, they're probably going to kill me for saying this, but kind of the more modern version of the avalanche. So it's a device that goes in your pack that runs a fan kind of in front of your face so that if you are buried in an avalanche, it circulates the air and keeps you from inhaling CO2 and dying from asphyxia. That is something I hadn't seen before, and they done a bunch of testing on it. It's getting launched in a few different products in North America that they talked about. So that was very much news to me, and just another rescue device.
That's fantastic. Any other interesting technologies in that realm, and like physical, actual things tools that will help us out there?
Well, most of the stuff that I'm looking at is more, kind of avalanche control tools and more sort of industrial applications. That's a lot of what we're doing. I think like there has been some advances in airbags, both in terms of technology and pack design. So, I definitely encourage people to look at the variety of options that are out there because it just keeps continuing to grow, which is great. Same with beacons. I think the avalanche rescue transceiver companies are doing a nice job of not just building one unit, but building, units for professionals and, more simple but very capable units for recreationalists. And so again, there's just a wider variety of options out there. And that makes it a little bit hard to kind of pick the right one, but it's really nice to have options, be able to get something that addresses your own kind of personal needs. So I definitely encourage people to keep thinking about that and researching that.
Terrific advice. And I think it's a great place to end it. Is there anything else you'd like to add here at the end of the show?
So we're hoping for a great winter. If you're in Colorado, please check the avalanche forecast. We want you to use our products, tell us what you're seeing out there. And I hope everybody has a really fun and very safe winter season.
Thank you for that sentiment. I appreciate you very much, Ethan. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great rest of the day. Thank you so much for listening to the SnowBrains Podcast. If you like this podcast, please share with friends and family, and please make sure to subscribe. To find out more about SnowBrains, please visit us at snowbrains.com. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, X, and more. This episode of the SnowBrains Podcast is brought to you by Club Med. Ditch the hassle and embrace the freedom of an all-inclusive ski vacation with Club Med. Their resorts in the European Alps and Canada offer the perfect blend of exhilarating skiing, exceptional service, and worry-free pampering. Enjoy having lift tickets, delicious meals, lessons for all ages, and endless après-ski fun, all included in one price. While the kids are having a blast at the supervised children's clubs, you can focus on mastering your skiing skills and creating unforgettable memories on and off the slopes. Visit www.clubmed.us or call 1-800-CLUB-MED or call your travel advisor to experience skiing without limits. This episode of the SnowBrains Podcast was edited by Liam Abbott. Music by Chad Crouch. And I'm your host, creator, and director, Miles Clark.